So one thing that I think comes up, and it's coming up a lot more now, is what do we do when you have holidays like Valentine's Day or like New Year's Day or things like that, which aren't part of the Hindu tradition, but we're citizens in a global village. So whether you're in the U.S. or the U.K. or in India, you're surrounded by this. So you were talking about all the spend on Valentine's Day. So what should we do as Hindus? And I think the first thing is, just as good global citizens, we should do our research. So we should understand, if you look at Valentine's Day, how did Valentine's Day originate?
Namaste, I'm Deepthi. Valentine's Day, we're no strangers to it, be it in Europe, where it all started, or the USA, which is responsible for almost 21 billion spent in 2021. And even in India, the market is growing, and it accounted for over 22,000 crores in Valentine's Day spending. But all of this is futile without the human emotion of love and affection. So we think of love stories as those that end in happily ever after. But thousands of years ago in ancient India, love was understood in a different way, as one of the four aims of life, as a means for spiritual growth, as a celebration of the play of the divine, as something profound, beautiful, and sometimes elusive. So what does love mean to us Indians in today's context? Perhaps the author of the book, The Hindu Love Stories, has the answer for us today. We are very excited to have Aditi Banerjee with us today. She's the author of the book Hindu Love Stories. She's a practicing attorney at the Fortune 500 financial services company in the US. She has an MBA from Columbia, and she also did her doctorate from Yale Law School and her BA from Tufts University. She's a prolific author and speaker. Aditi's first novel, The Curse of Gandhari, was a successful bestseller, and it was published by Bloomsbury India. Her second novel, On Shiva and Sati, has been slated for publication in 22 by Bloomsbury India again. She co-edited the book Invading the Sacred, an analysis of Hinduism studies in America, in collaboration with Rajiv Malhotraji, and her essays have been published in prestigious journals. Welcome, Aditi. We are super excited to talk to you today.
Namaste. Thank you so much for having me. Looking forward to talking to you today, Deepthi. I think it'll be a very interesting conversation.
So how did you decide to write these books, especially the latest book that we're going to talk about today?
Yes, so for Hindu Love Stories, the idea actually just came to me a few months ago, and I was thinking about, I spend a lot of time reading the Puranas and the Etihasa, and there's so many gems in in this literature of ours, and I've always wanted to find ways of bringing readers into that literature, ideally into the original text. And I find that a lot of us have become so alienated from them. So I know even in my own case, when I was growing up, I wanted to read the Srimad Bhagavat. I wanted to read the Mahabharata, and it was very difficult to find anything authentic in English. And over the past several years, there have been more such translations made available, like Gita Press Gorakhpur has very good English translations of the Valmiki Ramayana and the Srimad Bhagavat. But they weren't necessarily immediately available. And then even when it is available, unfortunately, many of us don't read them. And I was thinking about things like, like Valentine's Day, when people are thinking about, love, or there's interest in that emotion. And everything that's out there is just like romance novels, or it's fairy tales, or it's these kinds of things which aren't necessarily dharmic. And is there like a dharmic alternative to address this need that is out there, this phenomenon that is out there, but that looks at it from a dharmic perspective? And so that was kind of the origin of it.
Very cool. Tell us a little bit more about Hindu love stories.
Sure. So it's really looking at so first of all, the topic itself, Hindu love stories, even when I thought of it, it seemed like a little bit perhaps strange or unusual. It's not something we think of, Hinduism and love stories. And that in itself was an interesting question to me, which is whenever we think about love, we think about it this very modern, this modern way. And I think the best example to show this contrast is, there's the story of King Edward of Great Britain, and he actually abdicated the throne because he wanted to marry this American divorcee, Wallis Simpson. And because he wasn't able to marry her under the laws of England, he actually abdicated the throne. That's something that's considered very, romantic and like a good thing. But if you look at it from a Hindu perspective, where you have the Ramayana, where Sri Rama, no one was more beloved to him than his wife Sita, but then he had to send her away. And people have this very stupid idea that he sent her away because he was afraid of gossip, but it's no such thing. It's because as Raja and as one responsible for the kingdom, he had to prioritize the dharma of being a good king for the subjects, which means taking into account the way his subjects feel and think, even if it's not appropriate or proper. And so that's a very difficult sacrifice, of course. But that's what makes Sri Rama Sri Rama. So it's two very different approaches to a similar, to a similar thing. And I think nowadays we don't even understand what that Hindu perspective is. And so these stories, they come from a lot of different texts and Puranas. They cover a lot of different things, but they all, if you look at them together, there's an integrated worldview or like a values framework that comes out of it. And what I found is not only is it interesting to read, but I think we can gain a lot of practical wisdom out of it in terms of how to have more balanced, healthy relationships, how to lead a more dharmic life, how to integrate different aspects of ourselves and our lives.
That's fascinating. You're right. Like we are so disconnected from our roots with the advent of Western views of love and romance, and also we've also been indoctrinated by Bollywood and that view of love. So, what do you think is the dharmic way of love? Like how should people that are interested in dharma and following dharma, how do you think they should view love and days like Valentine's Day?
Yeah. So a few thoughts on that. The first is, I think it's always helpful to start with the framework of the Kurukshetra, so the four principal aims of human life. And you always start with dharma. So dharma always comes first. And dharma is again one of those very difficult words to define. But basically, the idea that there is this rhythm or this order and balance and harmony in the cosmos, and dharma is that which regulates us to be in consonance and harmony with that greater order. And it's always focused on loka sangraha, so the well-being of all sentient beings in the highest sense of the word, and also in one's own spiritual attainment, so moksha. So the highest good for the individual as well. So it's both the collective and the individual. And then dharma is applied at many different levels. So there's the societal views of dharma. And then for an individual, there's swadharma, or the individual's own dharma, part of it, which is determined by the phase of life that they're in. So your dharma when you're a student is different from your dharma when you're a grihastha or a householder. And things like that. So that's the first thing that we have to concern ourselves with. The second is artha, or the pursuit of wealth in accordance with dharma, which means you're not just becoming wealthy to have a lot of money, but you're investing that in society and in the community around you. And then you have kama, and kama is again one of those very often mistranslated words. And this is where Rajiv Ji's books on Sanskrit non-translatables is so important. But it's sometimes it's just translated into desire or love or lust, but it's actually just enjoyment in the highest sense of the word. So finding enjoyment in samsara and in this world, again, in accordance with dharma. And then finally, there's moksha, which is the ultimate aim, which is your liberation and enlightenment. And so when you understand kama in that context, you understand, first of all, there's no shame or guilt or prudishness to be associated with love. There's celebration of these emotions and of these interludes where people find a good relationship, or they actually enjoy themselves. This is something like our acharyas and our texts never shied away from. So if you look at like the Sanskrit literature of someone like Kalidasa or the Puranas, it's very frank descriptions of the beauty of the human form, of even if it's the rishis and the apsaras or whoever it is enjoying their time together. And there's nothing morally judgmental about it. But because it's in accordance with dharma, the question is always asked, how do you do this in a way that's not destructive or dysfunctional, but that leads both partners to the higher aims of life? And another example in the way that you see this, which I write about in the preface, is there's this rite which is known as the Kashi Yatra Prayoga, which is part of the wedding rites in certain parts of India. And the way that this rite happens is before the wedding ceremony begins, there'll be a young man who's making preparations and has started going on his way to Kashi. And Kashi, as we all know, is a sacred abode of Shiva. It's a city of learning. It's the holiest city for Hindus. And he's going on his way, and then the father of the bride comes and says, "Young man, I know you are on your way to Kashi. May I suggest that you please consider my daughter, who may be a partner to you, and she could be your bride, and she could help you, and together you can pursue the Purushartha, and through the Grihastha ashram or the family life, prepare yourselves for this." And it's easy to think of this as just kind of like a joke, like something funny, and then he's getting pulled back into samsara, but it's actually has a much higher meaning, which is, what is the purpose for our getting married? It's not just to have children, it's not just to enjoy our lives together, but we are being partners who are thinking of our collective good. And the Kashi Yatra isn't something we're postponing or abandoning. It's just through this journey as a couple, we are pursuing that path. And I think that's kind of that perspective on love, which comes from these stories. So one thing that I think comes up, and it's coming up a lot more now, is what do we do when you have holidays like Valentine's Day, or like New Year's Day, or things like that, which aren't part of the Hindu tradition, but we're citizens in a global village. So whether you're in the US or the UK or in India, you're surrounded by this. So you were talking about all the spend on Valentine's Day. So what should we do as Hindus? And I think the first thing is, just as good global citizens, we should do our research. So we should understand, if you look at Valentine's Day, how did Valentine's Day originate? In the Christian history, there are stories about a Saint Valentine who had nothing to do with love. He was basically just someone who was imprisoned and martyred. But then what's interesting is it coincides with February 15th, when there was a pagan Roman holiday that was about romance and about celebrating love. And then later on with Geoffrey Chaucer, a famous writer, this became kind of popularized. And so you have to understand where these origins come from. And so many of the holidays, whether it's Easter or other things, are basically at heart pagan indigenous traditions that have been usurped and distorted into other things. So I think as a basic starting point, we have to have that cognizance and not just celebrate something mindlessly. The other thing is, I think it's important to celebrate our own holidays. So if we're going to celebrate Valentine's Day, we should also celebrate, like Ekadashi. Like actually today is Ekadashi, and and the Hindu New Year and Shivratri and Janmashtami and all of that. I think that's much more important. And then the other thing is to not take these holidays and do adharmic things. So sometimes we don't even have that understanding. Like, for example, when it's our birthday, it's very common to blow out a candle. But actually that's a very harmful thing spiritually, because to us, the light is sacred, and blowing out the light is actually like bringing inauspiciousness. So things like that, that we don't think about. Or on New Year's Eve, if we're going to make the temple stay open and have darshan like after midnight, that may not be in accordance with the rites. Now, having said all of that, we do live in a multicultural world, and I think unfortunately sometimes now it's becoming like a test to prove how Hindu you are by saying like, I'm not going to wish anyone Merry Christmas. And I think that kind of thing is very silly, and it's also just kind of this is not good. This is not a good way of connecting with people. So there's nothing wrong if you're doing everything else, in accordance with dharma to celebrate, whether it's like a New Year's Eve or Valentine's Day, but do it with understanding.
That's so true. Like you mentioned Kashi Yatra, it's a very common ritual in most Hindu weddings. And I'm sure like most of us don't really understand this deeper spiritual meaning. And it's more of we just go through the motions because it's a part of our, ritualistic culture. So it's very important for especially this generation to understand what our dharma stands for and how it views love. So how does your book help us understand the Hindu or the dharmic way of love? What can we learn from your stories?
So I took about, and these aren't, my stories, these are just stories from the Puranas, the Etihasa, and all I tried to do was just put it in like accessible English, because just that would be in a syntax that would be familiar and easy to read for a modern reader in English. And the other thing I tried to do, so there's more than 25 stories, and then just grouping them in different themes. So one is on just the beginnings of love. The other is on love can sometimes be fleeting, or what happens when there's separation, or how is it, like we talk about falling in love, but actually how can you rise through love, and stories that show that. So for example, there's a story from the Tripurahasya, which is a text by that Sri Ramana Maharishi said was one of the best depictions of Advaita Vedanta. So in that story, it's there's a queen, a prince and a princess. They're married, and the wife actually teaches the husband, so she becomes the guru of the husband. So they're married, and the husband is noticing he is so enamored with and in love with his wife, but his wife doesn't seem to be reciprocating his feelings as much. And so he says, well, why are you like this? And why are you not enjoying things? And then she's asking questions. So what is enjoyment? If today you enjoy my youth and beauty, but tomorrow I become old and ugly, what will happen to your enjoyment? And like this, over the course of their time together, she actually is his guru and kind of brings him to enlightenment, and not just him, but the entire kingdom. So there are stories like this, stories about separation, about sacrifice, and then through reading those, I think a few things happen. One is you understand again like the worldview and the values and things like that, but they're also very moving stories. So if we were just to sit here and talk in the abstract about dharma, artha, kama, moksha, like yeah, that registers, and then perhaps like in a few days you forget about it. But once you read the story of, let's say, like Savitri, or the story of Satyabhama and how she helped Krishna slay Narakasura, like those stories stay with you. You don't forget a story. And one of the reasons I wanted to do it in this format is because stories are so powerful, storytelling is so powerful. And traditionally we knew this, and this is why stories and the arts were always such an important part of our civilization. But I really think, just these stories are so memorable and inspiring and moving. So not only the intellect, but the heart should be moved. And I think that's my hope. So one, that it'll leave that kind of impress and that inspiration, and the other, that it will make readers want to read the original text in full, because in this kind of anthology you have to summarize, and you have to you can only do certain selections. But I hope it just awakens a hunger to read like the full Puranas, the full Etihasa. And actually, one of the things that was really sad when I was writing this is there are some Puranas like the Vishnu Purana, and unfortunately, like I am not a Sanskrit scholar, but when I was looking at the translations, we still don't have good English translations. Like I have to rely on something from like H.H. Wilson, and who these like Eurocentric Indologists who don't truly understand and appreciate our text. But that's just the reality of it, because we've neglected our own textual traditions so much. And so I really hope that there'll be more translations of all of our Puranas that are done properly and in an authentic way.
Yeah, that's very true. Like you mentioned, like most of the translations are unfortunately very Eurocentric, and they look at it with their own lens and with biases and their own agenda. So I really hope that we have more and more Indian authors that translate, or at least people that understand the dharmic way, even if they aren't like born Indian or from India. They understand the dharmic way and come up with true translations. So speaking of translations, you mentioned about Sanskrit non-translatables. Tell us a little bit more about that and how it ties into your book as well.
Yes. So this was the thing. I wanted to keep the book, like I said, like easily readable, and not very jargony, but at the same time to preserve the authenticity. Because like I said, the entire purpose is to bring that worldview to people, and it's not easy to do that in English. And so a lot of what took a lot of my time was figuring out how to introduce a Sanskrit term, and then not just use like a one-word translation, but actually provide like an explanation, and then keep using the word. There are also other interesting questions. So I was working with an editor in the proofreading, and the general convention is that if there's a Sanskrit word or word of whatever foreign language that's in a dictionary, like let's say Merriam-Webster, then you don't put that word in italics, and then you have conventions on capitalization. And what we actually found is in these conventions, if you have the term like Rakshasa or Asura, that's often capitalized. But if you have the word Deva or Devi, it's lowercase. Like that's the convention. So if we were just to follow the rules of like Chicago style, like that's what we would have done. And I told my editor, I'm like, that just makes no sense. And in Sanskrit, you don't have this concept of capitalization. But in English, like if you're talking about God or prophet, it'll be capitalized. And so like whatever these conventions are, but just as a sign of respect, it feels like if you have Deva or Devi, it should be capitalized. But we had like a lot of discussions around this. And I think there are a lot of these types of questions that come up in not just translating meanings of words, but how we use English to express certain things. So the other side of that is when you import Sanskrit terms into English, how they're just really cheapened, right? So if you have like a guru in English, you're not talking about a spiritual master, you're talking about like a fitness guru, So nowadays you see like yoga instructors, like yoga instructors say like everyone who's in their class is a yogi. And you have like this cheapening, or like a pandit isn't someone who's like really renowned for his or her learning. It's just someone who comes on a talk show. You have a talk show pandit, right? And I think even in India, you see this where the word bhakt has become like this cheap term for if you're a supporter of Modi, then you're a bhakt. But a bhakt is so much like bhakti, like that's one of the most sublime concepts of Hinduism. When you cheapen the words like this, it may not seem like it's very important in the beginning, but over time, you're kind of corrupting these terms as well. So there are a lot of these kinds of things about language where we have to be much more, careful, thoughtful, and deliberative. And I would say the other thing in this is, this was independently published. I self-published it. So I had that kind of like the freedom to make these choices. But if you're working with a traditional publisher, they have their in-house style guides, and it can be very hard to deviate from that. So when we think about like power and language and all these things are very tied together, which is again why Rajivji's work on this is so seminal and important.
Yeah, so most Hindu stories are very heteronormative. So, but we know that in our Vedic culture, other forms of sexuality and love were always included, and the society itself was very inclusive. Do you have any such stories depicting, same-sex relationships or trans relationships?
And not in this one, but I like, I know like in Kama Sutra and other texts they are there. And I think it's definitely worthy of its exploration. So not in this one, but in future editions, hopefully.
Cool. So Aditi ji, there are 7 words in the Greek language to describe love, and Sanskrit probably has more than that. And there's love in all its nuanced forms. Could you elaborate on what those nuances are?
Sure. So, well, I'll just say, I think what this reflects is having a much more, nuanced, insightful, like psychologically rich understanding of human nature and of emotions. So again, this goes back to language and being very careful and precise when we use a word, how we're applying it. So today, like when we use the word love, it's very like cheap and generic. Like I could love eating a bagel, and then I could love God. It just doesn't, it doesn't mean much. But in Hinduism, if you have something like mamta, which is the maternal love, or this feeling of affection, you can think of it for children, but it's actually like it's more than that. It's a bhava. So even as part of your sadhana or your practice, if you're worshiping Devi, you're worshiping this quality of mamta, and you're wanting to bring that into yourself, and spiritualizing that as this bhava that you have for all creatures of the universe. Then you have you have prema, and then you can have other things where it's more like intoxication or infatuation or passions, like the different shades along the spectrum. And again, it goes to the fact of when you're looking at this in the framework of dharma, where are you on that continuum? So are you able to have this selfless, like something like mamta, where you just want the well-being of others, and the scope of that is increasing, and that that in itself becomes like a spiritual practice that's leading you towards dharma? Or is it more like this intoxication, addiction that you have that's leading you away from dharma? So again, it's not about this moral judgment, but about understanding where you are in accordance with dharma and the aim of moksha. And in the Greek 7 terms as well, also you find these differentiation between like friendliness versus like flirtatious love versus this more romantic engagement. And I think I think you find this distinction between, I'd say, like this ancient conceptions of love. So not just Hindu or not just Asian, but just in what we call like a traditional sense, or like an orthodox or like an ancient sense versus these more modern conceptions. So like there is this English poem where this man's about to go off to war. It's by, I think, Richard Lovelace is the poet. And he says, he's leaving behind this woman, and he tells her, "I could not love thee half as much, loved I not honor more." So this idea that by pursuing honor and duty and going off to war, he's being like more worthy of her love, and that makes him more capable of love. And I think another thing that happens is in the modern society, we have so many, just psychological and mental issues, so many like self-esteem issues, that when we talk about love, we're bringing like a lot of other things into it. A lot of it's just about like having unhealthy self-esteem and this kind of neediness. And so we see love as a means of validation. If someone loves me, then there must be something good in me, or I'm worthy of something. But actually the way our, traditional, acharyas and Hindus have understood it is just, love is the quality of the one who is loving. So again, like these bhavas that we're talking about is from the perspective of the lover, not the object of love. So in other words, the more dharmic you are, the more spiritually attained you are capable of giving pure love. And it's not coming from your own neediness or from this transactional selfish perspective, but it's just coming from within. So I think we've always had that understanding. But nowadays there's so much confusion, and it's become like a validation instead of understanding these different bhavas. And then within Hinduism we have bhakti. So I think while other societies like the Greeks and other ancient cultures had this kind of framework, I don't think anyone has a sophisticated, developed, and sublime, a sacred framework the way that we do. So even in bhakti, there are many different rasa and bhava. If you're looking at like the Natya Shastra and the rasa framework, there's so many different elements to this. So even in bhakti, there's like a bhava for like a samboga bhava, with this feeling of union with the beloved, which in this case is the divine or one's ishta devata. And then there's also the vihara or the separation, the feeling of being separate, which also is its own bhava. So there's this own thing that we get from being in that bhava. And then there's when you have the two together. So there are all these things, just within bhakti, for example, very advanced, conceptions and nuance to this. So all of that cannot be captured by the word love. But so those are my thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's amazing how advanced that culture was, and in terms of coming up with understanding the nuances and the sublime emotions in human psyche, and coming up with appropriate words for it. I remember reading somewhere that language influences human behavior and culture. So if you don't have words to describe some feelings, eventually those feelings are kind of eliminated from that culture. So there might actually not be that full range of emotions that humans are capable of if there aren't words to describe it in the language that you use. So thank you for diving into that for us. So help us understand how would you differentiate prema and sneha and kama or moha?
So again, like moha is kind of like this delusive attachment, right? So it's if you have a sense of like ownership or possession, or that this person is mine, and that's kind of like a moha, and that can, again, because these things aren't like morally judgmental. So even if you're like a parent and you have a child, or if you're a child with your parents, like even in that purest form of love, there can be this moha that comes. And so the idea is that but when you have a relationship, you should think of it as like Ishvara has provided this person into my guardianship, and therefore it is my duty, or it is my dharma to do what is best for them. And this kind of like non-attached love, which is very difficult to do in practice, but that's kind of the aim. So always looking to purify towards that. Again, like kama can be understood as, I think sometimes it's kind of just understood as lust, but I think again that's a kind of a crude way of understanding it. It's really the sense of enjoyment. So I think the enjoyment you get from another's company, and then this too can be, it's not that it's good or bad. Like there's one of the Purushartha, it's there, it should be there. But then again, it's in that continuum. So when is it perhaps too much, and when do you need more of it? So for example, there's the story of Agastya and Lopamudra. So Agastya is a great Muni, and Lopamudra is also a Rishika, and she's the mantra dishta for some of the mantras in the Rig Veda. And there's a very famous hymn in the Rig Veda where Lopamudra actually complains that Agastya Muni, her husband, has been neglecting her for so long, because he's so immersed in his sadhana, that he should also pay attention to her. And then it's not done in like a complaining way. It's just done in a very profound way. She's just saying, like men should also come to their wives, and it's kind of the celebration of both aspects being there. And actually, and he agrees, and at the end he is hailed, and they're hailed for honoring both in effect. So this kind of idea is there. And then again, with like mamta and sneha, you have these, these are, in a sense, higher, because it's the sense of like almost motherly kind of affection, which is like caring for someone, for protecting them, things like that. So like this, there are just many different nuances and aspects to that.
Very nice. What is the importance of Hindu storytelling in our Puranas and Etihasa?
Yes. So, and this goes back again, I think, because we look at things in so much of a Western framework. So a lot of times we think of our Puranas, our Etihasa, as just myths, or kind of like made up stories that are for, they're just kind of fictional, and therefore not very important. Or if they are, they're just symbolic, and not as important as philosophy, or like the Upanishads. And actually, this is a very gross misunderstanding of things. And again, I would go back to like Rajivji's work in terms of like being different, and this idea that you have like some traditions that are history centric, where it really matters what happened when, and dating things, and if Jesus wasn't born, does Christianity fall apart? And whereas in our tradition, it's not like that. So reality and history are two different things. So whether something in the Puranas like literally happened or not does not take away from whether it's truth. And whether something is truth, again, I think the way that our acharyas and rishis would understand that is there something in that makes you understand something of the nature of samsara, or human nature, the relationship between the jiva and Brahman? And is it something that leads you toward dharma, or towards moksha, or away from it? And that is how you'd understand whether what something is real or worthy of being read. And that really has not much to do with whether something literally happened. You're not recording in a notebook what's happening around you. And the other thing that they understood is the importance of stories. So there have been a lot of studies and books that have come out in recent years about like neurologically how we are wired for story. That's a term that Lisa Krohn uses. And it basically is like going back to the most ancient of times, when we were, basically living in caves. Stories is how you would understand, what's safe, or, what's, how to be careful about things. So it's said, like there's a Hindu saying that there are different ways you can learn that fire is bad for you. One is someone tells you if you touch fire, you'll be burned. Another is if you hear a story or if you see someone else getting burned, and then you realize, okay, fire is dangerous. And the third is you go and get burned yourself. So storytelling is kind of like that, where through another character that we're removed from, we can see and learn from the experiences that they go through. And so, you know, in traditional Hinduism, you know, even when acharyas talk to each other, they use stories as shorthand. Like if you see the story, yes, we understand the value from that, and we can talk in that language. You know, I already spoke about how stories are very memorable because they resonate with you. So we can talk about how truth is a very important value, and we can talk about the abstract and be okay. Or I can tell you the story of there was a boy, Satyakama Jabala, and his mother had sent him to the great Rishi Gautama to be initiated. And when he went to the Rishi asked, as his custom, you know, what is your gotra? What is your lineage? And he says, well, you know, my mother doesn't remember. She doesn't know. So I don't know who my father was. And the Rishi says, because you're so truthful and honest, you're basically you deserve to be initiated into brahmacharya. So that story kind of better exemplifies the value of truthfulness and the ideals of truthfulness that we had than just, you know, talking about abstract principles. And so these stories really encode a lot of our values, our philosophical principles, our metaphysics in ways that resonate with everyone. So a lot of times when people say, oh, the Etihasa Purana is our, you know, the Panchama Veda, the fifth Veda, and it's accessible to women and Shudras, people take it the wrong way. They take it to mean, oh, so it means like, you know, women and Shudras aren't qualified for the Upanishads or the Vedas. And that's one way you can take it. But what I really take of it is, if you just have the Puranas and the Etihasa, that by itself is enough. You can get all of the learnings, all of the wisdom you'd get from the Vedas and Upanishads just from reading the Etihasa and Puranas, because that's how much value and importance and relevance these stories have, and everyone can get it. So it's universal. So I don't think that detracts from the Puranas and Etihasa. I think it just makes it even more attractive. But unfortunately nowadays we've really forgotten this. So before we would learn it from our grandparents, we'd be surrounded by, you know, plays and artwork and things like that, and we just through osmosis we would get it. Now we don't have that, and because we're not also reading this literature, we're losing all of that, which is a big danger, I think.
True. Thanks to your book, we can revive some of those stories from our Itihasas and Puranas. So Aditi ji, you have mentioned in your book that there may not be a happily ever after, but there is a dharmically ever after. Could you help us understand what that means?
So I think you know, and this kind of comes from like this Disney culture of, you know, like, you know, and then even that's changing a little bit. But like the tradition, like when we were growing up and you had stories of like Cinderella and things like that, it was always about like finding, like the ending was always happily ever after, and it was always from kind of like, you know, finding one's prince and things like that. And this kind of, I think, gets imbibed subconsciously. And again, we're in popular culture, there's been so much attention on romance and things like this, that people come up with these very unhealthy notions. Again, like similar to finding self-esteem through love and relationships, but like finding happiness. And because we've lost, you know, like sadhana and yoga and things like that, where you find contentment and fulfillment from within, you know, because we've abandoned all of that, we end up that, like, you know, in our teenage years or when we're young adults or when we're adults, we don't know, we're not equipped to, you know, lead lives that make us, you know, contented and fulfilled within. And so therefore we keep like seeking these things from outside, and we think, oh, happiness is if I do that, happiness is if I find X, Y, Z. And then it never is. You find X, and then maybe for a short time it makes you happy, but then it's not enough, and then you have to move on to Y and to Z, and it's kind of this consumerism culture. But it's not just on spending money, it's also through emotion and relationships and what we invest in it. And so therefore we have all of this very, very wrong and not in the right order. So the idea of karmically ever after is you just don't know. Even if you find the best person that you're most attracted to you, this is like the person of your dreams, you don't know what karma has in store for you. Like samsara is such that you're not going to find lasting happiness in samsara, even in another person, even as great as that person may be. And so understanding there's like a higher purpose, a higher meaning, that happiness isn't the end goal. It's something that can and will come, but it comes and goes. And developing like a titiksha, or like this fortitude of not being so subject to like the peaks and valleys of this giddiness of love, but understanding what dharma is, and being, like complete in and of oneself. So if you think of like, like Shiva and Shakti, for example, they're both, they come together in union, but they're both, complete in and of themselves. And so that sense of understanding that the happiness isn't the goal and dharma really is, and whether you find happiness or how much happiness you find, that's karma, that's determined by a lot of other things. But what you can control is the karma that you're creating, what's in your mind, what's in your speech, what's in your action, and you can pursue dharma. We have to pursue dharma. So those things that are in our control, that's what we should do. So that's kind of the idea of moving away from this false notion of happily ever after to dharma.
That's really, really fascinating and actually very insightful. Like you mentioned, most of us grew up watching movies and learning about love probably from films and books that were looking at love from a very Western consumerist standpoint. So I think everyone has this idea of Princess Charming or Prince Charming, and if I find them, that would be like my ultimate goal, and then everything would be happy after that. So it's so ingrained in our subconscious because this entire generation has grown up watching all that on television and in movies. So it's really refreshing to actually understand the real meaning, and I hope that this book helps people look at love and life in a real way and in a more realistic way, rather than having all those notions that are actually quite toxic. So what is one thing sorry,
that's actually why I brought it into the title. So it's Hindu love stories dharmically ever after. Just to make that point.
I love it. So what is one thing you would want your readers to take away from your book?
I would want them to just take the inspiration, like any one of these stories has enough inspiration and lessons to last us a lifetime. But I just hope they find inspiration, even if it's just from one of those stories, and find a way to apply it to their real lives. And it has nothing to do with me. It's those the original stories themselves. So I think just having even like one more insight about love that can be applied in real life, to help them on their own journeys towards dharma and toward moksha, that would really be the best thing I could ask for.
That's wonderful. I really, really hope that everyone reads your book, and thank you for making all these stories so accessible. And I think this is something that's very needed for the current times and our generation and the generations to come. So thank you so much for writing this book, and wish you all the very, very best.
Thank you, Aditi, and I really enjoyed your questions and our conversation. So thank you for having me.